Welcome. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
We're in the process of what are ultimately going to be talked about as the Noahide laws. And these are basic divine laws for humanity as opposed to the Jewish people. So let me get us into the text. I hope that eventually you can see it. There we are. So we just were told in verse 3 that man could now eat animals, they could eat meat. However, they were not allowed to take a limb of an animal, an unessential limb or non-vital limb from an animal, and amputate it and then consume it. And also, one was not permitted to drink the blood of a living animal, or etc. So going on, v'ach, however, right? However, et dimchem lenafshotechem edrosh. He says, God is saying, I will require of you your life blood, right? Your blood for your lives. Miyad kol chaya edroshenu. So I'm going to require it of any living beast. Umiyad ha'adam, and from any human being. Miyad ish achiv, from a man against his brother. And Rashi's got edrosh et nefesh ha'adam, I will require the life of a human being. So in other words, murder and any killing of a human being is considered liable, it is actionable, etc. So let's take a look at Rashi here. Ach et dimchem, however, your blood. Af al pi shehitarti lachem netilat neshama bivhema, despite the fact that I have allowed you to take the life of an animal, et dimchem edrosh, I will require of you your blood, mehashofech dam atzmo. And here we're talking about someone who commits suicide, from one who spills his own blood. So suicide is prohibited as a Noahide law, right? Liv nafshotechem, for your life. And it says, af hachonek atzmo. So the fact that it says your life, in other words, if you take your life, even someone who strangles himself, afal pi shelo yatsa mimenu dam, despite the fact that there is no blood being spilled, there's no blood coming out of that person. Again, taking your life, whether it involves spilling blood or whether it doesn't. Miyad kol chaya, from the hands of every animal, from every beast. Lefi shechatu dor hamabul, because the generation of the flood sinned, v'hufkaru lemachol chayot ra'ot lishlot bahem, and they were given over as food for wild beasts, vicious beasts, to overcome them, to overpower them. In other words, when it says lishlot bahem, these wild beasts at the time of the flood were not held accountable for taking the lives and for food of human beings. Shne'emar, as it says, and this is an interesting translation of Psalm 49, Nimshal kebehemot nidmu. Okay, so it says, so here we go. So nimshal can be, in the context of that psalm, it's suggesting that human life can be compared simply to the life of an animal. But here the word nimshal is from mashal, to moshel, to be governed. He is ruled, okay, and kabhaimot nidmu, like the animals. In other words, he is governed by the animals, and the idea of his life being taken, and this would be at the time of the flood. Lefichach, and because that was permissible at the time of the flood, lefichach, for this reason, hutzrach lahazir alehem et hachayot. For this reason, the animals had to be warned about this. In other words, so that the idea is that when an animal takes the life of a human being, that animal is judged. Interesting idea, because it's hard to see an animal as being responsible in that regard. However, that appears to be the meaning as how we traditionally understand this. Umiyad ha'adam, and from the hand of man, miyad hahoreg b'mezid. Here we're talking about one who kills someone intentionally, ve'ein edim, but without any witnesses, ani edrosh, I, that is God, will require of it. In other words, will punish such a person. So that even if a person isn't able to be punished by a human court, the divine court will judge this person. One is ultimately accountable no matter what, whether that accountability is in front of a human court or whether one gets away with it, at least in this lifetime. Miyad ish echav, and this additional of from the hand of a man, his brother. And this situation is miyad shehu ohev lo ka'ach. This is a case where there isn't any intention or maliciousness involved. This person, A, loves B like a brother, v'hargo shogeg, but it's a question of manslaughter. It's an unintentional, he kills him accidentally, unintentionally. Ani edrosh, I will require an accountability of that person, im lo yigaleh, if he is not willing to go into exile, v'yivakesh al avono limachel, and requires and seeks to have his iniquity forgiven. So he goes on to say, she'af hashogeg, because even someone who kills someone else unintentionally, tzarich kapara, they still require atonement. So the act itself is, even if one doesn't have an intention to do it, the point is that there may be negligence involved. There's a good chance that it has to do with some level of negligence, and taking a life on account of negligence is still going to require atonement. Ve'im edim lechayvo galut, but if there are no witnesses to require him to go into exile, in other words, the court would normally send such a person into exile, into one of the cities of refuge, and he'd have to stay there until the death of the high priest, which was considered to be an atoning act, but he would have to stay there until such a time. And if there are no witnesses who can testify regarding what happened, the court is not going to be able to sentence him in that regard. V'hu eino nichma, and he himself doesn't admit what he did. He doesn't humble himself. HaKadosh Baruch Hu doresh mimenu. The Holy One, blessed be He, will require accountability from him. Kamoshe darshu rabotenu, and there's an example given of how this might actually take place. Our sages explained, V'ha Elohim ina leyado. It says, and God, the God, has forced his hand, right? Sechet Makot, in the tractate Makot, this still is going to be explained. HaKadosh Baruch Hu mizamnan lapundak echad. The example given is that you have someone who killed someone else intentionally, and someone else, another person entirely unrelated, who killed someone unintentionally, but through negligence, etc., that the two of them are, in the story, invited to an inn, which is a public location, and the murderer, right, the one who got away with murder, goes up a ladder. The one is underneath a ladder, and the one who killed the person unintentionally goes up the ladder, and the ladder breaks, and the person falls on top of the murderer and kills him. And of course, now there are witnesses because he's in a public place. And even though he killed him unintentionally, he will be sent into exile. And that is the scenario that the rabbis put together to explain how God might be involved in making sure that justice takes place. So let's go on. Shofech Dam Adam, one who spills the blood of another person, Adam damo yishafech. His blood shall be spilled by a human being. And this is talking about the fact that a court is given the authority to sentence someone to capital punishment, that it requires that there's at least a sensibility here, that it requires actually divine permission for a human court to sentence someone to a capital punishment. Ki v'tzelem Elohim, because in the image of God, asa et Adam, he made man. So it's interesting that this B'Tselem asa et Adam may in fact give explanation to why a human court can do this, that in this sense, that because the word Elohim has the connotation of a judge, and in the image of a judge, God made man, or God made man in his image, in the sense that human beings have the capacity to be able to administer justice as well, even on this kind of level. Let's take a look at Rashi. Adam damo yishafech. At the hands of man, his blood shall be spilt. Im yesh edim, if there are eyewitnesses we're talking about, in other words, that there's no doubt whatsoever, hami tuhu atem, you yourselves need to give him the death sentence. You should kill him yourselves. Lama, why? Ki b'tzela Elohim, and here we go, because human beings are created in the divine image, and so they have that capacity and that obligation to administer justice. So it's worth commenting a little bit here. So the Torah clearly accepts capital punishment as a legitimate form of the administration of justice. However, I will tell you that in rabbinic literature, especially in the tractate Sanhedrin, we realize that what this is saying is that while human beings are in a perfect situation where there's absolutely no question that this is part of malicious intent on the part of the individual, and they were warned, they had to be warned, that they knew, they were very conscious that what they were doing was a capital offense, that capital punishment can be administered. It doesn't necessarily mean that there's any desire to administer capital punishment. It's just that it's on the books and that it is there as a possibility. But it could only be done in a court of 23 judges, and there was always appeal. In discussing the details of this, every precaution was taken before someone could be executed. So it's, I think, also essentially supposed to be a way in which to discipline human beings, to warn them, etc. To what degree that's an effective warning, I think it can be to some extent. If I'm allowed to philosophize a little bit, it seems to me that the people who go out and murder numerous people, etc., you hear about these things. It's like the absolute reverse of, taking life so cheaply, that people are willing to take life cheaply, and the idea of the Torah wanting to make sure that it is not taken in a cheap kind of way. Asa et Adam, he made man. So there's no subject for the he. It's just a pronoun And Rashi says, Ze mikra chaser. This is an elliptical scriptural statement, but tzarich liyot. In fact, the way it really should say it is asa haoseh et hadam. The one who made man. And he says there are many such examples of these elliptical phrases where the subject isn't mentioned and it just, the verb itself just is in the third person, and we have to take the subject as understood. So, okay, one more verse. Va'atem pru urvu, as for you, be fruitful and multiply. Shirtzu va'aretz, abound in the land, uruvuba, and grow mighty in it. In other words, but it also has to do with being multiply within it, be numerous. Here, let's find the place. Va'atem pru urvu, and as for you, be fruitful and multiply. Lefi pshuto, so this is mentioned twice, right? It was mentioned very early on in Genesis, where man is told to be fruitful and multiply. Lefi pshuto harishona livracha. The first time it's mentioned back in Genesis, it's understood as a blessing to people. Of course, I explained that the word bracha had the word blessing has the connotation of plenitude. V'kan letzivui. However, here it is a command. Ulefi midrasho, right? And according to the midrashic interpretation of this, where this comes, it comes right after the law about capital punishment. Lahakish mi she'eno osek befiria verivia. It is to connect one who does not engage in being fruitful and multiplying, l'shofech damim, to one who is committing bloodshed. So there's a very, you can see, at least according to this interpretation, there's a very strong mitzvah of procreation. Again, one has to understand that this is written Torah, and that there's always an oral Torah that takes care of circumstances. There are people who are incapable of procreation, etc., etc., and this would not apply to such people. But if you're in a place where you're capable of it and you're able to do it, the idea is a very strong movement towards procreation and to do that. And I'm actually going to stop here. We got to the end of a parsha. And so for today, I'm going to stop. And God willing, we'll continue this next time. So I'm going to stop the share. Okay. Very good.